afternoon. This is our regular meeting of the Governance Committee. I'm Councillor Julie Grocott and I will be chairing the meeting this afternoon. Some housekeeping rules. Can we please make sure that we all maintain social distancing at all times and wear face coverings whenever we are in the venue, unless you are exempt or we are seated in our allocated places. Please can I request that all mobile telephones and other such equipment is turned to silent so that we don't disturb the meeting this afternoon. You will all be pleased to know that there is no fire alarm test today, so if we have to have an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff and we will all get safely out of the building and the assembly point is Tudor Square. Our meeting today is being live streamed for the public to view. And can I just draw members' attention, please, to item 8 on the agenda, in order that we can deal with that in some sort of semblance of order. My intention is, starting with Sinead, because she is the nearest, Councillor Richards, I will just go around the room and ask for members' comments. I think hopefully that way then we can pick up all the information that we want to give and hopefully that will make it easier for officers to collect and collate as we go along. So I hope that's okay. It will be helpful when you are giving your information if you could please give it in relation to things that you've considered that you think it may be helpful that we can give officers a steer in relation to where we are and things that we may be welcoming and wanting to endorse. And also if there are any areas that you feel that we need to particularly focus on where we're going forward, if there are any gaps, any information that we've missed, anything like that. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier, particularly for me. I'm going to go around the room and ask everyone to introduce themselves in turn. I will start with our Vice Chair, Councillor Baker.
Councillor Penny Baker, Stannington Ward.
Gillian Duckworth, Director of Legal and Governance.
Jay Bell, Committee Secretary.
Councillor Sue Alston, Forward.
Councillor Mike Leverett, West Ecclesfield.
Councillor Mohammed Maroof, Crooks and Crossbow.
Councillor Mary Lee from Downhill Ward. Councillor Dawn Dale, Shire Green and Brightside.
Councillor Christine Gilligan from Hillsborough Ward.
Councillor Peter Garbutt, Nether and Sharrow Ward.
Councillor Sioned Meyer, Richards, Manor Castle Ward.
I'm Laurie Brennan, I'm the Head of Policy and Partnerships.
And I'm Alexander Pollock, I'm the Assistant Director for Governance.
Lovely, thank you. Jay, do we have any apologies, please?
Just received apologies from Councillor Mark Jones.
Thank you. Item 3 is exclusion of press and public. There are not any items that we need to exclude the press and public from, as far as I am aware, which leads us on to item 4, which are declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations, please? Item 5 is minutes of the previous meeting, which are at page 9 in your pack. Are we happy to take those as an accurate record, please? Lovely, thank you. And item 6 is public questions and petitions. Nigel, you are very welcome. Sorry I haven't got over to have a chat with you. Hopefully somebody's told you where to go. Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Though I feel I need binoculars rather than glasses today. My question is fairly straightforward, I hope. The date for the submissions to the transition inquiry were very tight, understandably. However, can the committee confirm this and the evidence sessions on the 7th and 8th of December will not be the last opportunity for public input to the design and development of the new committee framework, or the finer grain detail still awaiting development? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, Nigel. Yes, as you know, we are, for the whole year, we've been working to some very tight timescales because of the referendum, which means that we don't have any slippage in relation to the work that we're doing. So I do apologise for that, but unfortunately the timescales are out of our hands. Starting in the new year, we've got some very exciting news in relation to Involve. Will be coming along and doing lots of consultation work across the city. So I think there's a great opportunity, not just for you know, yourself and other stakeholders to get involved, but for the wider public to become completely engaged with us. Of course, it's really important to us that as we do move along, that we do continue to engage and receive feedback on the process as it develops. So yes. Okay. Thank you, Nigel. Turned it off, sorry. Item 7 is the review of the draft principles, which can be found at page 17 in your agenda pack, just for information. There are 3 recommendations in relation to the pack. I think we've been on quite a journey with our design principles in terms of where they should go and what we should do. And I'm going to let Alex take us on a lovely story of that journey with them, and then I think we can have a discussion and decide what we want to do when we've laid out where we are with them all. Alex.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'm really pleased with how this piece of work has transpired, because it's an example of something that we said we would do, working with real people, with stakeholders in the public. We said we would agree something early on, which we did at your first governance committee meeting. We had an item in September where you agreed to turn some some governance principles that were originally formulated back in 2019 into a set of design principles, as set out in this report. I won't go into the detail again. And at that point, you instructed us as officers to treat that as the first concrete thing we could use to discuss with stakeholders and residents, people in Sheffield. We set out to do that, went away to do that. When we last met in October, we didn't yet have all that feedback collated, but I said to you it was looking useful. And Appendix 2 of this report, Appendix 1 of this report, I should say, does now collate, I think, a really impressive amount of thought-through, careful, reasoned input from a whole range of perspectives into what we have said our principles should be for this work as we undertake it. As a result of that, and to try and take on board what we got back on this, I produced a draft set of changes which you can find at Appendix 2 to this report, page 53 of your pack. And I circulated this to you all and the public when we published this agenda at the beginning of last week. And for the benefit of those who may be watching or listening who are not members of the committee, what happened next was that we as a committee, as we normally would, met on the following morning to discuss this committee meeting, what was on the agenda and how we might intend to handle our business. And the feedback I got from councillors was, this is great. This is really, really good. We've got things that we were missing in here that we didn't previously have, but the language is horrible. It's full of jargon. They're far too long. I couldn't explain this to somebody on the street. If I was trying to explain this to a class of school children or something, there's absolutely no way this is intelligible. It's full of officer language, and you quite reasonably pointed to me and said, you're an officer, you've written this full of jargon. Please attempt to rephrase, which I think was excellent feedback. What we then did is, and you've had this in a supplementary appendix, which is you've got separately, because we published it a couple of days later. If you haven't got it on your table, I think we have got printed ones in the room that we can share with you if you haven't picked them up. Jay, do you mind jumping up and grabbing them for committee members? Thank you. You've had it electronically, but if you want the paper copy, Jay, I'll hand them round. Thank you, Jay. What we did is the very next morning we had the the next of our public and stakeholder engagement sessions booked in already. And with a quick swerve, we used one of the breakout sessions that morning to ask that question of the individuals who were there, to say, okay, great, we've got a revised set of draft principles here. This is what they look like. Okay, we've already had your input on the content, what they're saying, but could we now have your input on how we've said it? And members won't be surprised, because you already knew this, to know that our feedback was exactly in line with what you'd said. If you look on the third page of this supplementary appendix, comments included, this language is not fit for purpose, which I take as a very clear piece of feedback to me as a draftsman. But perhaps it's not surprising, given that what you had there was essentially something that had been written by committee several times over. So, in response to that, in this supplementary appendix, we have circulated a set of design principles which are now significantly reworded, but which are designed to still capture all of the individual points that were spelt out in more detail in the track changes version you had in Appendix 2. We've made a real effort to make sure that there's nothing missing, that it transfers across, but to have scrubbed out all the specific bits of governance, bureaucracy, bureaucratic language, jargon that we were kind of pointed towards by you and then by the people who helped us take a look at this at that public engagement session. So, these principles in the supplementary appendix are, I think, now commended to you as an alternative to your Appendix 2. You've got the longer version and you've got the shorter version, and as a committee, it's in your hands if you want to propose an amendment to the recommendations in the paper, which would be to instead accept these shortened ones, with any more considerations you want to give to them before you do so, then you may do that from the floor today. Before you discuss and give consideration to it, I just want to remind you one last time the purpose of these things, which is twofold. The first is, as we go through the process of designing the future governance structure of Sheffield City Council, its committee system, these are designed to be our North Star. So as we consider option A or option B, which one better fulfills these criteria, these principles? That's idea one behind having these things agreed. Idea two is that sometime further into the future, probably next year, perhaps middle of the year, perhaps the end of the year, I expect you will be in full flow of reviewing how it's working. Whatever it is that you've implemented by that point, you'll be giving consideration to, has this done what we intended it to do, and what further changes do we need to make to continue to improve it? And these, again, should be your criteria for such a review. So those are the reasons why it's important to get it right, but I'd like to think that you're pretty close now to what should be a final set.
Thank you, Alex. I've got Councillor Alston.
Thank you. And I actually think these, sort of the latest version, if you like, very, very much of an improvement. I think they are clear, and I think they are, you know, the suggestion that came from somewhere about having a key point and then a little explanation with it, I think actually does make it a lot easier to read. I've just got a couple of suggestions, I'm afraid, which you may or may not like, or the people may or may not like. The first one is on the 5 principles, number E, letter E. I've just got a thing, I don't really like the terminology cutting edge. And I just wondered whether we could just maybe consider changing that to be up to date and follow best practice and keep improving. I think best practice is the term that's used in the previous version, and I think it is fairly clear what it means, so I think it would be a useful phrase to keep in. Because cutting edge could mean a lot of different things to different people. It may not necessarily be good, cutting edge. And my other comment was around the engagement principles. The first of those is transparency, which talks about communicating. And I just wondered whether we ought to add into that we will be open and communicate in a way, etc. Because transparency isn't just about making the communications clear, it's also about making them complete. That we don't, I mean, obviously there are always a few things that councils do that can't be discussed in public, but most of what we should do should be, and therefore it should be part of the principles of how we do things.
Thank you. I have got both of those. Councillor Richards, then Councillor Garbutt, then Councillor Gilligan. We're just going down that line.
I quite like the idea of us being cutting edge, actually, Sue. I think it sounds very Sheffield and steel and stuff. And no, that's me being serious, actually. I do like it, but you know, whatever. Sorry, can I just ask? You know the new committee system. This is being a bit picky. It's a bit like the Eric Morecambe playing this, having the same notes, but not necessarily in the same order as Andre Prebin. That some of these are about councillor-specific things, and it would be just good if we grouped those. So, like when you've got 10 high expectations of councillors' behaviour, that could actually be grouped with 16 and 17, or in order to make it clear which bits are actually about the council and which is about councillors. That's my only comment. And I'm, like Sue, I'm glad to see something in plain language that I can read with my mother for hours.
Sorry, we've no pictures. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points. I quite like cutting edge as well, but maybe I can offer a sort of an alternative, and I think forward-looking, because I think we need to be certainly anticipating what could come down the line, and I think forward-looking does that job. The other thing is, I'd love the shorter version. It does the job. Does that mean we're going to completely do away with the longer version, or will that sit behind it as the legal document, as it were?
My view would be there is a lot of work there, there is a lot of useful information there, and that will be something that will always be part of the inquiry, so it will be there. It will be there as a reference, but I think as Alex explained when he was taking us through the journey, in terms of what we would be mapping our work on, it would be this plain English set, so that we keep ourselves in plain English, so that we are making sure that what we are doing and what we are saying is clear to the all members of the public in terms of understanding where we're going. So it wouldn't be lost, and it would be there, and if we needed to refer to it, then yes, we could do so. But I think we need to be clear as a committee in terms of which principles we will be using to do the work too, because saying, well, this week we like these and next week we like those is just going to become incredibly difficult and not terribly good. So that would be my view. Does that help?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I like the simplified list or overview. I just have a point about the new committee system number 5, and I know it's going to sound a bit nitpicky, but when I read it, it says, seek out and listen to voices from across the city, valuing them all equally. Now, I 100% support that idea, but the word worried me a bit. What does valuing them all equally mean? And does that mean we're setting ourselves up for people to say, yeah, but I told you that and you didn't do it, so you haven't valued me? And I just wondered whether we need to be aware of something and say, take into consideration in decision making. Oh, that was all. I was just a bit worried about what valuing equally meant. But if that's all, thank you.
Any thoughts on an alternative, Councillor Gilligan?
Yeah, I just thought listen to voices from across the city and take the views into consideration when decision making. But take all views into consideration when decision making. But I'm not precious about it.
May I suggest, if you are valuing all of the voices that you can hear, that you would be taking them all into consideration. So when I was trying to boil this down to what's at its core, that if you say everybody is valued, a lot of the other things I thought I might find myself saying about what you would do with things they would tell you and so on, sort of flowed from that value statement. So that's why at the moment it says valued.
I completely understand that, and I support that principle. I just was nitpicking is, what would you do if people said, but I don't feel you have valued my voice equally because you haven't taken it into you haven't shown me that you've acted on it. That was all that worried me. It was for future, but you know, if everybody's happy with it, I will.
Councillor Lavery.
Yes, I'm fine with this, actually, the original version. It's about the value in the people and their right to comment and say what they do. The actions afterwards are not part of that actual principle that's set down.
Any more comments? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I prefer valuing. I think that's what we should do. We should value people's opinions. Taking into consideration feels a bit more technical, I think. So I wouldn't be happy with that one. And some people can have an opinion, but unfortunately it might not influence what the final outcome would be, because we know that. We listened, we value, but however. And I know you do that if you say take into consideration, but it just feels too technical, that's to me.
Councillor Garbett.
Thank you, Chair. I think this revolves around how we evidence how the decisions were made. And I think if we say we've received all these inputs and we accepted that one for these reasons and we rejected that one for these reasons, that actually gets to a situation where we can say we've taken all of these on board, but there are reasons why we've rejected them. And I think it's the the nitty-gritty of how we actually evidence how the decisions were taken that we need to take from that.
Councillor Maroof.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just talking about item 5 here. No problems with the wording there at all. I think that's fine. The issue that does get raised quite regularly is whose voices we're actually listening to. And there's an accusation. I'm not saying it's real, or it might just be perceived by people that we sort of listen to the same people time and time again. And officers just pick on the same people and same consultation groups time and time again. And those groups then in themselves become gatekeepers to stop other people from coming in and giving their views. And I think that's terribly important, especially if we're going to be transparent and open and leading to a new era of making decisions. That accusation has never gone away for many, many years that I've been associated with the local authority. And some of the recent exercises I've seen seem to be the same groups of people being invited to be consulted on, whether that is for regeneration matters, community matters, whatever. It seems to be the same people, and the message coming back from others is, the sort of argument against that could quite easily be, why don't you come forward? But sometimes that is not as encouraged as it should be by the authorities. So something in there, I'm not got any words for it, but something to suggest that we might get some new voices, new people volunteering their time, because people do it free. They do it voluntarily. They do it in their own time. And to encourage them more to come forward would be quite helpful. I mean, I know certain areas where people are extremely reluctant to come forward and talk to us because they say, it'll be the same old answer, you're going to do what you want to do, and what is the point of me actually making any sort of comments to you? Which is quite disheartening, to be honest, when you spend a lot of time as members trying to engage with people. And that is something that, I'm not saying I've got the answer to it, but what I'm saying is something that we should potentially have an answer to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think you make a really important point. And for me, the work that Involve are going to come and do, hopefully, will address that, because we know that they do have a track record of getting out and about into communities and making sure that those seldom heard voices are heard. They also do lots of work with councils and have agreed to do with us in terms of, making sure that there is a model left with us in terms of the consultation that we can do then moving forward. I think that was certainly I saw another benefit of having Involve come and do the work. So hopefully that will go some way towards addressing that and reassuring people that we are genuine in wanting to make sure that we do all of that. Looking at and and Alex will have to tell us whether I'm reading this right or not, but looking at point 5, where it says, should seek out and listen to voices from across the city, are we trying to capture there that this is about, you know, the seeking out bit is about trying to get hold of the seldom heard voices and making sure that we do cover them? And if so, are you content that that does do that, or is it, do we need to just think about something else that we may want to add in there to make sure that people do have the reassurance that we are genuine in what we want to achieve here?
Just to come back on that, if I may. I think the wording is fine, and the wording's always been fine from local authorities across the board. The intentions are generally quite good as well, but it's actually going out there and engaging with people. Sometimes it's much easier to engage with people you already know and the groups that you already know, and it makes life a lot easier for the consultation exercise box to be ticked. I'm particularly also concerned about the business community here as well, which is there are a lot of people out there that we don't engage with, and I'll be perfectly frank about it, they don't engage with us either. But they should be engaging with us, and they should be encouraged to engage with us, because any sort of regeneration projects in the city, whatever they may be, employment projects, does need that sort of input. And it's not necessarily that we always go back to organisations, whether they be semi-third sector or from a public sector background, pure private sector background, and not just the Chamber of Commerce. I think we need to look a little bit beyond that. So the wording for me is absolutely fine. It's the actions behind it that I have not doubts about it. I think the intentions here are extremely good, but how effective are we going to be? Because we don't want to be sitting in a year's time repeating all this again, saying it's the same old people making the same old decisions and the local authority listens to nobody. I mean, look at the average number of people that vote in local elections is 20-odd%. We should be engaging far wider than that and getting people to think, hang on, this local authority is actually listening to us and we do make a difference. And that's where I would like officers to spend a little bit more time on. And if there was anything to add to that, would be, officers will work on that to make that happen, and not just with the usual people, is what I'm trying to get across here. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. Alex has just slid me a little note across the table saying, should we make number 5, should seek out and listen to all voices. So we just add the word all in there, which would I think give that some nice clarity there. I think as a committee, it is down to all of us to make sure when we do start doing the engagement that we have covered off all of the voices that we want to do. And I think, we all have to take some responsibility as members of this committee to, one, make sure that we do that for this process, and then again make sure that it's something that we do moving forward, because it is about time that, we did get it right and we were absolutely inclusive. I've got Councillor Garbutt, then Councillor Richards, and then Laurie.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor Maroof. I think it's really important that we do make every effort to reach all parts of the city, and I think the insertion of all in there would make that a little bit clearer. So one of the questions I have is there going to be because the governance committee not in the same format, didn't exist before the decision to go to the committee system. Is there going to be one that will oversee how it works following May's changeover to the new committee system? Because I think if there isn't, then we are in danger of falling back into old ways. The whole change to the committee system was meant to get us out of those old ways where we were, conducting, we were asking the public questions after the decisions had been made, really. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think we need to reach far more people, and I think that needs to happen very quickly, because a lot of people are going to say, if it doesn't happen quickly, a lot of people say it's a change, but it's no change at all. So we need to make sure that people do realise we are changing, and that needs to happen very quickly. So the question is, are we going to monitor how it works following the demise of the transition committees and during the real committee system.
Well, I was going to answer, but Alex has put his hand up, so I'm going to let him.
You're into the next report on the agenda. Section 12 of the item 8 report specifically says, will there be a need for a separate governance committee, for example, to review the model in due course and continue to make recommendations for improvement? And these principles, as we've already said, should be the basis for that review.
I think I was going to pick up again on what Councillor Maroof said, because all of us here, elected members, are voices of communities, and it's not, in a sense, only the job of officers, is it, to be out there searching for groups all over the city. We, as councillors, are supposed to be the people who know our areas, know our wards, and can say to officers, by the way, if you go and talk to this small allotment club down here, they're talking about lots of stuff, which is actually bigger than just an allotments group. Or we might say, have you been to see this parent and toddler group here? I know them because we funded them for mugs and a kettle or something like that out of our ward pot. And these are the groups and the things that we know about our wards that, you know, we don't expect officers to know, but it is our job as councillors to make sure that those are the sorts of people we include. So, yes, consulting and talking to groups, but let's not expect officers to be out there just hoping they have found, if you like, the more organised groups. But we as councillors ought to be the people who say, and here are the less heard groups and less heard voices in our wards, don't forget to include those. And that is very much part of the role of being a community leader, which is the model that we as councillors have been asked to adopt. It's not, you know, yes, we are part of the council, and part of our being a councillor is bringing into the town hall, isn't it? Not just going out and expecting other people to do it. And I am pleased that we have got Involve coming to do some work afterwards, after Christmas. And that will be our job to make sure that we have spoken to them and said, these are some of the groups that I'm aware of in my ward who nobody really talks to very much. Maybe it's because they don't think that they're particularly political or that their voice matters, but it does, and it ought to, if this is the sort of council we want to be. So I just say, it's not up to officers alone, it's up to us. This change is huge, and we've got to make sure we're just as much a part of it as instructing officers how to do it.
Thank you. I'm going to give the last word before we try and sort out the one or two little changes to these to Laurie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I think the addition of the word all to the point 5 makes a lot of sense to me. I think that feels like a sensible compromise, because it then brings in that point that Councillor Maroof made about other stakeholders, including the business community in that. What I would say is I think it actually relates to Councillor Garbutt's point as well, is that actually the challenge that Councillor Maroof laid down there is a real one, I think, and I think Councillor Richards just articulated that we're all in that as well. We've all got responsibility in that. The culmination of that is probably every point on this principle list. It's not going to be solved by that point 5. That's about, yes, seeking out voices, but building trust, building confidence in how we make decisions. The openness and transparency of that is the bit where people feel confident about coming to talk to us and actually engaging us because they believe we'll do the right thing or are certainly listening. That's part of that process. So I think the point about the governance committee's any future role about assessing whether we've achieved the things we've set out to do is exactly the way we help to try and demonstrate that, but we also demonstrate it through our behaviours and the way of working.
Alex.
I think that you're close to summing up, and before you do, there's one more thing that I meant to say that I'd like to, if I can. In the appendix, as you'll have seen, councillors. There is lots of collated feedback from, in the first appendix, which is Appendix 1, where we've collated all the feedback. I should have specified, because it's worth it sort of sticks out that there is an enormous amount of really detailed, really clear feedback that It's Our City quite specifically submitted. And I think it's probably important that we acknowledge here that they've made such a sort of significant attempt to input and feed into this process in this organised way. I guess I should have said that the version of the principles, which is in draft here, which with all the track changes, incorporated a lot of their input, as well as all the other input from the other members of the public and stakeholders who spoke with us. And then that version is the version I built this slimmed down one from. So I kind of wanted to just make sure I've made it clear that there is a link from everything we've heard here, from all those sources, through to this slimmed down version. It's not that we're presenting this as some kind of alternative to all the feedback that we had. I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you. I think that's a really valid point, and I think it would be only right and proper to put on record our thanks to everyone who has taken the time to engage with this, because it is a really valuable piece of work, and it will be throughout this process as we change to the committee system and beyond. Before I sum up where I think we are with the tweaks to the new slimmed down model, it would be helpful to have an indication from you all whether that is the model that you want to run with, or whether you want to go with the original unslimmed down version, because there's no point in me summing it up if we're going to go with the first one. Views and thoughts. Is everyone content that we should be going with the new slimmed down version? Yes. Is anyone against that? Anyone undecided? Okay, now for the tricky bit. I'm going to start at the back, because that then leaves the Sue's point till last, which could be the hardest, because we've got the most comments on that one. Page 3 on engagement principles at point 18, to add we will be open. Is that, I forget, I didn't mark down who said that, but are we happy that was yours? Thank you. Are we happy? Are we all happy to include that there? Yeah. Thank you.
Can you just direct us? And we've got lots of documents here, and everybody's kind of. I'm looking in that room, and everybody's kind of. Which document are we looking at? This one. This one. Oh,
sorry. Agenda item 7, which was the supplementary one, which was the one that I think the slimmed down version that we'd all agreed.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, apologies for that. So on page 3, point 18, to read transparency, we will be open and communicate, ... Yeah, we're all happy with that amendment. Thank you. Then on page 2, we group together in whichever order whoever is doing the regrouping decides, but we put points 10, 16 and 17 consecutively at some point in the document, so that all the points that actually refer to councillors as opposed to the council all follow each other. Are we all happy with that point? Lots of nodding, thank you. And then we get to page 1, point E. So we could be really complicated and say be up to date, follow best practice, and be cutting edge and forward thinking, or we can take any mix and match of those. So it's really a matter of do we want to stick with being cutting edge? Do we want it to be forward looking, or do we want it to be up to date? I think we'd all agree that we want the follow best practice definitely in there. So I suppose it's just a matter of how we would prefer the first 3 words to sound.
I would sacrifice cutting edge for forward looking or forward thinking.
Be forward looking. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Sinead. Councillor Ralston, how do you feel about be forward looking?
I'm happy with that if we can.
Thank you.
If everybody else.
It's really helpful, this. Thank you. Are we all? So we're all happy that point E reads: be forward looking, follow best practice, and keep improving.
We're adding all of that, or are we not just changing cutting edge for forward looking? Cutting edge to me is very jargony language. Sorry, best
be
practice sounds
looking.
very jargony to me. What does best practice really mean?
Mike, you're nodding, Mike. Give us a...
Well, yeah, best practice, it covers a range of things. I don't think we need it.
Okay.
As it is. Forward thinking and keep improving.
So be forward looking and keep improving. Are we all happy with that? Speak now.
Rather have a hold high piece.
Thank you, Penny. Yeah, are we all happy with that? Thank you. That moves us on to item... Oh, sorry, Gillian.
Sorry, Chair. Did we also include the word all in item 5? Is that? Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item 8 is the transition to the committee system inquiry session, which starts at page 61 in your agenda pack. And Alex is going to give us a swift resume of where we are with this, and then I will go around the room for views and comments. Thank you.
So this item is titled Inquiry Session 1, and like the first film in any trilogy, I'm sure it'll get us going with some energy and excitement. Hopefully the second and third meetings will live up to the promise of the first, which on current showing is that we'll have a lot of data to look through, a lot of information to consider, and the real challenge for the committee is going to be to pull out of this some meaningful steer and direction for officers. So that's my summary of what we're about to try and do today. As Julie mentioned at the beginning, she's going to ask you to give us as officers a steer on two main things. The first is, are any of the matters considered by this report, which I will praise in a second, matters which you as councillors feel you can already start to give us a bit of an indication on, lean one way or another. And the other is, given that this is just the first meeting in a trilogy, what issues do we want to raise in this meeting which we don't want to lose touch of over the second and third? You've got people coming to speak to you and written evidence to consider over 2 days on the 7th and the 8th, and you need to be starting to build up in your mind what your key lines of inquiry are. What questions do you want to make sure you're asking to make value out of that time? And so really this session today, as well as giving us an indication of where your thinking is at the moment, based on all this information, is to get us going on how we work our way through that process. It's only the beginning. So, you've got on page 1 a number of purposes for this report. Some of them are what I've just set out. There's some others as well. We are setting out the context. We've got a lot of information here, which I'll talk you through. Sorry, page 61 of your pack, on the front of agenda item 8. There is, I've set out the purpose of this report, as well as saying, please, could you give us a steer on anything you can, as well as to say, let's start thinking about what we're going to do in the rest of this inquiry. We're also updating you on progress since last time we met. We're also giving you a bit more detail on the framework that we're using to build this with. And actually, we're kind of putting in front of you a first draft of your final report, I think. It'll look very different by the time you're recommending it to council, but I expect it to, on current showing, be more or less structured in a way similar to this. The things I want to draw to your attention from this report then, and I know I'm conscious the word briefly is ringing through my ears, that Julie just said to me. First of all, that we have organised this report and all of the information with it against the governance framework, which you as a committee have previously instructed us to use for that purpose. That's in your Appendix 1, and most of the members here have got it seared onto their retinas because I show it to you every time I come and brief you or talk to your groups or whatever. So we've organised this report using that framework. We've also organised all of the other data, evidence, information that we presented for you in the appendices. We've also organised that using this framework. So the idea is that as you go through this report, if you look at Section 7 on the role of policy committee chairs, or Section 8 on the role of policy committees, or Section 6 on the role of the leader, you could also look up, for example, role of the leader in Appendix 2, and you'll find information we've collated from the 2019 scrutiny exercise on that topic under that heading. You can look up the role of the leader under Appendix 3, and you'll see examples from 6 other local authorities that we've been looking into for you, 7 actually. And you can find what we've been able to find out about what each of those do with regard to the role of their leader in a committee system. You can also look up in Appendix 6, where you'll see a huge raft, again, of almost verbatim, but organised feedback from stakeholders and the public, and you'll be able to see what they've said to us about what the role of the leader should be. There are also some overarching feedback here, so in particular in this section, in this Appendix 6, there's a lot of feedback we've heard which was broader than any of those segments. It was about the whole system as a piece. And so as we go forward through this inquiry, keep hold of this pack. If you're wondering what to ask someone and you're thinking about the subject of how are we going to deal with statutory scrutiny in the future, you can refer to all of those appendices and use this information throughout to help inform your position. That's what this paper, this item, and today is for, is to sort of set this out as your starting point. It's a real wealth of information. The second thing to draw your attention to, because I promised I would, is what we've done since you last met. It's set out under 2.2 of this report, page 65. I'm not going to read it all out, but I think that the officer team have done an amazing job to do all of that there and pull together all of this in the timescales available. As you know, we spent a lot of time and energy setting up your transitional year arrangements, and really we've cracked into this since sort of August, September, having got all the arrangements in place, and to be now sat here with all this data, all this input from all these events, from all of these different sources, I'm really proud of the project team and the officers involved who've pulled this together for you. But I won't go otherwise through that in detail. So the last thing to say, because I think Julie has indicated that the way she wants to approach this, rather than going through each bit of the framework one by one, which might take a long time, she's going to ask you each for your reflections across the piece, and we'll build up from there, is just to talk about those inquiry sessions 2 and 3, and then one area where I presented more detail for you in this report, which is about the committee system, the number of committees in particular. So section 3.7 of the report on page 68 gives you a big list of the people that, as a committee, we agreed when we met shortly after the last of these committee meetings to invite to provide further information into your inquiry. That list has since grown, as you're aware, but just for the benefit of posterity and the minutes and so on, we've since added an extended invite to more councils, including Kingston-on-Thames and Brighton, and we also extended an invite to all MPs and David Blunkett, for example, as key voices that the committee might want to hear from. So we've ended up asking, I think, about 30 groups or individuals whether they would consider giving you written evidence and potentially talking to you as well over those 2 sessions on the 7th and 8th of December. I just wanted to report back to you that I think we're expecting around 11 around just under a dozen, maybe a dozen written submissions, 2 of which are from councillors inside this own council. So one of them is from the co-chairs pilot that Councillor Dale and Councillor Naz have been running, and one of them is from the Transitional Committee chairs. A different group of 11 people, I think, are expected to speak. And after this meeting, as a committee, informally, we're going to have a conversation about how we're arranging that over part 2 and 3 of the trilogy. But no, I don't think we need to get into that inside this meeting now. I said the last thing I would draw your attention to is where we've added a little bit more information. So, under each of the main sections of this report, starting at section 5, which is the headings on page 69, but the substance is on page 70, we've presented to you a series of design questions. The conceit being that if we ask all the right questions about each of these sections of the governance framework and then manage to answer all of those questions, we will have finished designing a governance system for May and beyond. So under each of these sections, we've got those questions for you, and the idea is that should help you, again, organise your thoughts, consider what questions you need to ask of yourselves, your groups and others in order to complete this work. In a few areas, we've started to present an indication of what the options might be. So you see under each of the sections, under for example, 5.1, where we were talking about full council, there are more questions we'll need to answer than this, but we've given you a starting point. Where we say, do we need a mechanism for calling issues into full council? Well, under those are the dark black bullet points. Where there are little light circle bullet points, here and in other sections of this report, they're sort of starting to give you a feel for where you might want to consider options for how you do these things. And the area of this report that's got furthest into that is section 8, which is about the policy committees. It kind of makes sense, really. You know, the crux of this change is that the Cabinet is being replaced by some committees. So you would expect, really, that the main area we would get into first is what are those committees, how many should there be, and how do they operate? And the rest of the system, we will work around that. In this area, you'll see that at section 8.4, on page 73, there are quite a lot of those little light circly bullet points because we've already given you a bit more to think about, and it spreads over the whole rest of the following page where there's various considerations. But before that, we've also given you some more information. So, last bit I promise. At 8.4, there is a short case study about Wirral, the Wirral, because as it, just by pure chance, they happen to have had an inspection recently. You may know they're in some financial difficulties, which the government inspection has actually provided some really interesting reflections on their new committee system structure, so it's worth bearing in mind. I've realised since publishing this that the links I put in the first paragraph under 8.4, I haven't actually included the most important link to the final report. So I will circulate that and we'll get it corrected in the report that's online. The other thing is, you've got 2 very important appendices to consider under this part of this issue. The first is Appendix 4, which you can find on page 137 of your pack. This is the first time that we have published anything that looks like a potential structure chart since full council produced a kind of a light version of one in advance of the referendum. You will see there are a number of structure charts here. I would say the one to start with is actually the last one, the one you find on page 141, which is labelled previous governance arrangements. It's labelled that because it's sort of a mixture of this year and last year. It shows 5 scrutiny committees, because that's what you ran before you moved to a transitional arrangement. But it also shows the transitional committees currently, which will go away at the end of the year, and the local area committees, which are new. Just to help you, because I haven't made this clear in the report, you see that those 5 committees are grey and the co-op exec is grey on that diagram. What I'm trying to show is really that those are the committees which are sort of being replaced in the other diagrams by the part that's in grey, labelled policy committees. It's sort of, that's your, at a most basic level, that's your straight swap. The exec and the scrutiny are the parts of the system that in a committee system are being replaced directly by policy committees, by a committee structure. So on all the other options in that appendix, the only difference between them is the number of policy committees that are presented. The reason we've got various options is so that we could help you model a continuation of what you will be familiar with already from the 2019 data, where a whole lot of work was done to look at what could be the relative costs of different sized models depending on how many committees you have. And in Appendix 6, we've extended that work by also adding to it, as you requested us to, information about how much time it would take for individual councillors and for the councillor body as a whole if you were required to sit on all of the extant continuing committees plus 10 or 7 or 5 or 3 new committees replacing the cabinet. So we've modelled that up for you as a kind of a capacity calculation, and a few other bits of data there as well about, for example, how frequently they might be able to meet using current resources, and so on. So I really am done now. I don't think that qualified as brief, but there is a lot of information here. This report will continue to be updated. I expect that in due course you'll see something that looks a lot like it, but with more data, more information, more options presented clearly, and that will be how you as a committee would get to a point where you would be agreeing which options you wanted to take forward. But for the purpose of today's conversation, to helping us out with a steer on anything that you can, and to try and agree between you key lines of inquiry for this process, I think that's more than enough from me.
Thank you, Alex. We'll move straight on to Councillor Richards, then, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, this is terrifying, isn't it? You know, I'm somebody who loves reading and is a total anorak about all this sort of stuff, as you all know. And I have found it quite daunting, just looking at the sheer volume of stuff to be done and how we're going to move the stuff that we do at the moment to decision-making in another way. So my thoughts about it are, for anybody who's been in the Cabinet at any time and knowing what each Cabinet member does and then working out how each committee will manage to do this is quite hard, because we want to make sure that every aspect is taken in, but it's just such a lot of work to expect a committee to do every couple of months. So something that I think is really, really important to talk to other authorities about is going to be their schemes of delegation, which I know is the dull stuff, but is the vital stuff if we're going to know what we expect the committees to do, what we don't expect them to do, what we expect officers to do, and where, if anything, there's going to be something slightly grey in terms of urgency. At the moment, cabinet members or executive members can make decisions quickly. So how is quick decision-making going to be made? Because we know that particularly the business world finds the way that we work quite often very cumbersome, and we might say that's very democratic, and they'll say it doesn't help us, we need our decision from you tomorrow. So getting those bits right, I think, will be important. And the other bit, I suppose, is wondering who wants to be on committees, because all councillors are different. So for me, being on my LAC and being on licensing, for instance, and audit, would be the bits that would interest me most, and I don't particularly want to be on a policy committee. Is that going to be okay, or is it going to be something we'll all have to be on in order to fulfil all this work? Because I know we said before that, or has been said, well, you know, only 10 people make decisions and 74 people twiddle their thumbs. I don't want to twiddle my thumbs, but I do know that there are other people who are better at policy than me, and that my strengths will be in other areas. And so do we really need to have everybody on a policy committee? Or can we just say, it's fine, we can have fewer people doing it? Or will the public then say, oh, you're not pulling your weight? Those are some of the issues, I think, for me, in terms of representing the ward that I'm in. And the other bit that I suppose isn't taken into account amidst all this myriad of what goes on at the town hall is just all the stuff that we actually do in our wards. Every Monday, sorry, not every Monday, the first Monday of every month, we have the Manor Action Group, which is actually the Manor ward version of a LAC. And that's our meeting place with all of the different groups, and where we, in a sense, we three councillors hold them to account on behalf of our communities. That's incredibly important to me, and would be far more important to me than, I don't know, going to policy D if the two of them clashed at the same time, because I know which one is the useful one to the people in my ward. And those are the things we haven't really thought of, is the horses for courses bit, because councillors want to do different things, and we shouldn't have to do, if you like, the bits that we're not particularly good at, if we can use our strengths in other areas to bring in and strengthen those bits in the town hall. I don't know if that made much sense. So, yes, I'll be happy to be in Anorak looking at schemes of delegation, but otherwise I'd rather be out and about in my ward doing things, frankly, apart from the spotter licensing.
Thank you. Councillor Garbett.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think there are about 4 areas that I've got questions about. Obviously, the first one is the how many themed committees we're going to have. And I think that's fairly crucial. You know, too few and there may be overload. Too many, there may be overload in a different sort of a way. In the sense, you know, it'll increase the all the work that officers have to do as well. So I think that's a crucial question, and I think we need to look more widely at what other councils have done on that one. Within the idea of themed communities, themed committees, the committees will have a chair. So is that chair, are the chairs going to be shared out in terms of proportionality between the parties who are on the, who've been elected to council, or are they going to be given to the majority party or whatever it happens to be at the time? So how do we allocate chairs? How do we elect possibly even chairs? And within that, something we were talking about with Alex last night as well was how, because at the moment, apart from the Greens, the other parties have a whip system. How will the whip system influence what goes on within the committees, and how will evidence heard really be heard? Will the whip system interfere with listening to evidence and basing decisions on that evidence? So that's the first area. That's the themed committees. I want to go to the overarching committee as well, and this isn't set in stone at all. And I think we really need to be very careful about having an overarching committee. This may be a committee that deals with the urgent stuff. This may be a committee that makes sure that other committees work together if there are cross-cutting elements of policy. But we need to design this very carefully. And we even need to question whether we need one at all. I think there are examples out there that don't have one. There are examples that do. So that's one of another of the big questions that I've got there. Public engagement, and I'm coming back to Councillor Marouf's point earlier on, and I think it was mentioned that there was something something I mentioned that will be in here. At what point do we start engaging the public? At the moment, we start engaging the public when there's a paper that needs a bit of consultation, and the public view that, whether it's right or wrong, the public view that as being too late. So at what point do we start involving the public? At what point do we start asking the questions? If we're formulating policy and we're doing it without a public voice, the possibility is quite high, and it's happened in the past, that we'll get it wrong. Or we'll get it wrong according to the public, shall we say. So I think we really need to be very careful about finding out and deciding when we start engaging with the public on any new policies. It could even be that the public put forward areas that we need a new policy on. But I don't know, that's something we need to decide on. And my final point is the local area committees. I think there is a good opportunity for the structure between the committee system, the themed committees, and local area committees to work really, really well. And I think we need to make sure that we get the best possible structure so that the local area committees feed into the policy-making decisions that the themed committees make, and that the themed committees feed into the local area committees to make sure that they're aware of what the issues are and can do some of the work on contacting the people of Sheffield on that. So I think those are the areas that have jumped out at me. There's a lot of others, but I'll keep it brief and leave it at that. Those are the areas that I want to pull to the committee's attention.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think it's a very comprehensive document. I think it does ask a lot of the right questions. I couldn't think of any other questions at the moment that I want on there. I've looked at them all, so I do think it's a really good starting point. Some of the issues that I'm most interested in and will be interested to see how they develop and have opinions on is, yes, the officer delegation. So I'm very happy that Sinead is going to be looking at that, because that's an issue I think is going to... I think that's an issue we do have to get right, because that's a very complicated and important issue. Another area I am quite interested in looking at the overarching committee, because unlike my friend Peter here, I think we do need some. If we're going to be a forward-looking council, we need to have a way of getting our strategy going in the right direction, and I can't see how we do that any other way, but there may be other ways, so I'm open to other ways. So I do think we need to really think about what is going to be the purpose of the overarching committee in taking the council as a whole forward. An area I'm very interested, again, to see how we end up solving it, is that the right word, solving it, is what are we going to do with full council? Because when you read some of the feedback in here, the public are quite derogatory about full council. They don't really see the value of it, or some of the feedback saying that. So I'd be really keen to make sure that we get full council that is meaningful and does something that needs doing, and the public can see it for what it is. So other areas, I think, for all of us, perhaps not quite so much for me, because I haven't really worked in the old system that long, so I'm not really embedded in it yet. I'm still kind of watching over it. We will need some support in how we all work together, because this is going to be a new way of working, and we are going to have to kind of set aside some of our previous ways of working. So I would hope there would be some kind of support available for us. I mean, I've put it here as conflict resolution training, but that might be a bit over the top. But, you know, something that will help us work together. And another area I've noticed when we're talking about openness and transparency is it is about communication with the public. And we're going to be relying an awful lot on officers' reports, as we do at the moment. And I think we've done an excellent job with this supplementary. It's simple, it says what we want to do, and it's easy to read. So I'm assuming that officers will also need a bit of help and support to start tailoring their reports to be the kind of information that the public can easily digest. I hope I'm not being presumptuous there to the officers, but overall, I think it's a really good starting point. I think that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We did have a conversation at the beginning of the year about wouldn't it be lovely if all officers' reports were only 2 pages long. I think I'm still waiting to see one of that length. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. I've been here for 5 years and I've never seen one yet. And actually, I think in some areas you do need more information, and that is my concern. And I'm going to say statutory services that we provide, where we have legal responsibilities, is a worry for me, because that responsibility will be delegated to officers, but there will be an elected member as a chair of a committee that will have responsibility for something that they've got no control over. And that is really worrying for me, especially like in children's services or adult social care. As an elected member, you would have that responsibility. So I worry about that heavily, actually, and we need to be really mindful. And I don't know what other cities are doing that have got committees when it comes to the legalities around that, when it comes to responsibility around safeguarding. I think for me, I think at the end of the day, we are politicians, and there will be times when we don't agree on things. That's why we're elected for our political parties. Don't forget, we're not elected as individuals. We are elected as members of political parties. So I think we will have to work out a way around that, but we can't get away from the fact that that's who we are. We are here elected based on our manifestos and our principles, and that's what people vote for us for. If we then start flip-flopping around on what people have voted for us for, it's not going to go down very well in the city, is it, to be fair? But I assume that all of us have all come into this for the right reasons for the citizens of Sheffield, and we probably agree on more than we disagree on. So I think we will have to fathom that out. Having been the chair of a transition committee, my other concern will be around capacity. And there's things in this document about this being cost neutral. And actually, I'm not convinced that back of house will remain, we will be able to function with the resources that we've currently got when it comes to supporting. Because we're looking at public meetings, and having met with some councillors from another city, where myself and Councillor Naz met to discuss job share, we ended up getting into the conversation around committees and how they function. And while we will have got public-facing meetings and debate and conversation, there's a lot of work behind the scenes that has to go on for all councillors, so not just chairs and vice-chairs of committees, but there'll be an expectation of other members on those committees to do pieces of work on policy, and it's how we're going to do that. I love being in my ward. At the moment, I probably cover about 9 different areas of work as a councillor, just within my council role, as well as working full time. And somehow we fit it in, because that's what we get up for in the morning. But I enjoy being within my community, like Councillor Richards. And my worry is that some of us are going to end up spending far more time centralised in the town hall than we are going to in our communities. And I don't want to only spend time, and I know I've spoken to fellow colleagues, we don't only want to spend time within our communities through our structures, through the LACs. We have relationships in our communities with individuals, and I fear that workload for some councillors may take us away from those relationships, which brings the voices of the seldom heard that aren't organised, that aren't in groups already. So if we're doing our job right as an elected member, we should be doing that already. And my worry is that some of that time is going to get taken away. So I do worry about that. I've got a list of questions, and I'm sure I won't go on about them today, but they're just some of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lane.
I mean, I agree with everything that Dawn said. Actually, we had a conversation before particularly about we are different parties, and we bring different things to these discussions and these committees. As when they formed. And people don't want us all to be the same. We don't want to be much of a muchness across the city. We want to have new ideas and different starting points. So I think it's really, really important. And maybe we can learn from each other, which we do. I'm sure we do, even though we maybe don't always acknowledge that. But we do learn from each other, and ideas that one party might propose sometimes gets proposed by another party further down the line. So, you know, but let's remember we are different parties, absolutely different parties, and we need to ensure that those political voices are heard as well, because there's people out there who voted for each of us for their own reasons. In terms of the LACs, I think it's good. We have got a process for sending things up from the LACs to the themed committees, and there is a process for sending things from the themed committees down to the LACs. But let's remember, and the LACs are about, let's not forget the LACs are about the communities that they are within. They're about those local area committees and the local people that live in those areas, and that is principally what they're about. And what emerges from those discussions that we have with our local committees, whether it's at councillors or in a more formal way in those public meetings, it's those items that individuals and groups raise with us that need to come up to a committee system to make the council shape its policy, work better. And also, you know, we talked about going out to engage with the public. There are some very special and seldom heard voices, but there are some very specialist groups of people that we always engage with that are about specialist areas of council. And Councillor Dale mentioned children's statutory responsibilities, but there are adult statutory responsibilities as well. And there's always been a mechanism for engaging with those groups of people and those stakeholder groups that are not that absolutely that have been there to shape policy, and we must ensure that those stakeholder groups are not forgotten, and those are the ones that we go to if we're developing a particular policy, whether it's about learning disabilities or mental health or whatever it might be. We go to those stakeholder groups as well as and sometimes the general public, they're interested, they want to know that we're doing the right thing, but they feel they will not have often the experience enough to contribute to those sorts of decisions that we might make.
Thank you, Councillor Moreau.
Thank you, Chair. To be contradicted here, I might be the only person that's ever worked in the old committee system for nearly 10. In Sheffield? No, I'm the only one, I think, in Sheffield. I did 10 or 15 years on the old committee system. And one of the things that concerns me about that was, if I use an example, is there used to be pre-meetings before committee meetings. And the decision was made at the pre-meeting, and at the committee meeting, everybody from the public used to think they're all going to debate it. And they used to sit around the table, and the decision had already been made. People will discharge all their information as officers, as we did. And at the end of the day, it was voting came in, all in favour, hands went up. And I have a vivid example of one. A new member of staff started, and we were debating the World Student Games in one of the conference rooms. And there was a lot of debate going around it, and she was really prepared to give information. And when it got to it, it was like the councillors weren't actually really listening, engaging at all, because the decision had already been made. So I think that's one of the things that people still remember. That's a remnant of the past that I don't see how we're going to... I'm with all this. Don't get me wrong, I'm with it all. But the fact is, how do we not fall back into the old habits again? Because a committee system is a committee system. And a mod committee system is just giving it a new title, is where I'm at the present time. But I think it needs a little bit more to it. And the other area that I'm concerned about is officer delegations. And this is, what is it, gamekeeper turned whatever the phraseology is here. But many a times officers were given delegated powers for various different things. Statutory reasons I accept. They are needed and they need to be done very quickly. But there are other delegations that were given. And I don't want to use myself as an example here, but you had delegations to authorities of how much you could actually sign things off on. And that kept changing all the time. And the problem from an officer's perspective was, from the member's perspective, was that this is an officer delegation. I didn't have any input into it. I made your comments, member of the public, but it was a delegated decision. So what I would like to see, and I don't think I've ever seen it in 30 or 40 years that I've been with the authority in various different formats. I've been in the private sector for 10 years now. A full list of officer delegations, and I'm sure there is one, and I'm sure Councillor Richards is going to give us a really good booklet on councillor delegation, and we'll look at the appendix and we'll see, yeah, that decision is on that page. But it's something that is quite important because it sort of underpins everything that we do as members. Because if the delegations are going to be shadowing or shielding our decisions, then we're not really being particularly transparent, are we? It's just like saying, well, we can't talk about that because that's a delegated decision. We can't talk about that because that's a confidential one. And we can't talk about that because it falls under section 52, subsection 9 of this, and therefore we can't have a real conversation about that. There's not a lot left afterwards, I think, to actually discuss apart from soft words. So I think that delegations is something that we really need to look at. And a comment on the Overarching Committee. If people remember, there might be members still around. You might have been there, Councillor Lee. We used to have something called a Star Chamber. And if you'd done wrong as an officer, sorry to use that phrase, but if there was something that was contentious, you were brought in front of the Star Chamber. Is the Overarching Committee going to be a similar sort of morph into a Star Chamber principle? Because that was where scrutiny was held in the past. So I just can't start seeing signs of the Overarching Committee morphing into that sort of area. And basically, all the other themed committees suddenly become subservient to the Overarching Committee. So I know I'm not making a great deal of sense here, but I'm just imparting certain amounts of knowledge here. So the Overarching Committee being in that position does worry me a little bit, because all you've done is not call it Cabinet anymore, but an Overarching Committee. And the need for one, if you're going to be transparent, is there really going to be a need for one? The other areas that, from my perspective as a member, and I'm sure others will agree with me, and I think it's already been alluded to by other people, is the length of reports. I can't remember which leader it was of the authority. A directive went down to all of those officers and said, all your reports should be no more than 3 pages long or 2 pages long. And we said, fine, that's not a problem, but our appendix were 150 pages long. So it didn't actually achieve anything at the end of it. So we still had to read the 150 pages of the appendix. So if we are going to really make a change, and I know members are, and I appreciate this now, being on this side, I probably didn't when I was an officer, that members are given information where the policy or the officer is an expert in that field and gets paid for being an expert in that field. And a member is given a report. And to be honest, I'm sure I've done it in the past. You look at a report, and not to look stupid, you think, hang on, I understand this, but I'll only pick on the very tiny bit here that I understand. And a lot of the sort of heavy stuff gets put in underneath it. And if you're a true, if you're honest about it, officers do that. And I'm not being derogatory about officers, because we have to, sorry, not we, and I'm not we anymore, but we had to do that to make it happen. So I think that needs to work a lot better. And not just from the members' perspective, from the public's perspective, because you can't expect members of the public to read 200 pages of it unless you really, really are interested in that subject. So that is another area that I would like to sort of explore with some of the other authorities, how they've got over that, because that makes life easier for everybody. And that leads me to the next point, which I was going to raise under the appendix of the new committee system, is point 16, which should allow all councillors to balance their time between local work, formal meetings, and their own careers and families. And it's already been alluded on by other colleagues here. But there's quite a majority of members, and in particular, we're trying to encourage members who are actually in the workplace. And to be honest, it's not a very attractive proposition to come in here and work 24/7. And I think that is the areas that we really need more input on. So the support of councillors is terribly important as well. I mean, I'm just looking at from my perspective here again, stand to be corrected and contradicted here, but in the Lib Dems, I think there's 29 of us, and we have one support officer. And in any equation, that's not acceptable. Never mind in a format where you're making very important decisions. So that clearly needs to be looked at, and then whether that has a cost implication, because we are saying it's going to be neutral here, but there is going to be some implications, I would imagine. And the other one, which is a suggestion rather than a comment on any of this report, is many, many years ago, this is going back quite a number of years, we used to have an association of metropolitan authorities that chief officers and senior officers were normally used to work together on. And the things that came out of that were things like officer member workshops. Because I'm sure we do them in a minor way in this authority, but in a fully fledged way where members and chief officers or senior officers have workshops where they can have a Chatham House rules approach to it and say, this isn't quite working, and make it work a little bit better. Because I'm looking at it from the officer point of view, because the officer nature is, and it was with me, whatever colour of party is actually in, you try to sort of fit in with it, not to look out of place. But the thing is, I think that's important as well, because I'm absolutely sure there will also be repercussions from officers as a result of this new system that we're bringing in place. And I think I've mentioned this to Alex before, and apparently he's the man who's doing it, is the fact that there will be job description changes. There will be changes around how they operate as officers. And we may have to put this in place by law, by whatever date we have to put it in place. But if the officers, and I know you're quite positive about the fact that it will work, but unfortunately, I was in this authority for a very long time, and it used to be responding for change, which could run for years. My longest running case was 21 years of an officer not agreeing to something. So there is that aspect to it. With all good intentions from members, we could still end up in a situation where we haven't quite got it right with the officers, and the officers are not comfortable with all that. And finally, is around the lack issue. I think the expectations when LACs were first around was people's expectation was that there will be decision-making bodies for a lot of things, and when they realised that it wasn't going to be the case in this particular format, I think the comments were starting to come back are, I mean, what are people normally interested in? They're interested in planning decisions in their areas. They're interested in street furniture, etc. All these sort of things being improved in their particular areas. But we have to keep a balance on that. I understand that, because we have an overarching responsibility for the whole authority and the whole city. But LACs have to be a little stronger than they are at the present time to work with the system. So these are just, some of them are my general comments. Others are things that I think we really need to look at. Otherwise, I think if we move into it, we'll sleepwalk into a situation where we end up being in danger of replicating the old system. One of the officers in this authority once said to me, when I first started, I'd only been here a week, he said to me, look, you know what, 2 or 3 years, something goes out of fashion. This is not right. This is not what we're going to do now. But 3 years later, it all comes back into fashion again. And this is what I'm getting the feeling here, is committee systems are all coming back again, but it's a different committee system that we're looking at. So I will shut up, Chair. Thank you for letting me speak.
Fortunately, I have no idea about the old committee system, and long may it stay that way. Councillor Levery.
Thanks, Chair. We had a very good group session with Alex last Friday, and one thing which helped to clear up a few issues for me were around the language and the terminology, because I was totally knocked with the key, non-key decisions transferring across to strategic, and what's the difference? And our strategic decisions, key decisions, is it just the terminology of moving to a committee system which has changed the words? And I got the sense that we're going to start on the basis that the strategic decisions are the current key decisions, and that would be the starting point before we move on. But I'd really like that clarifying. The next thing I want to have a discussion about is policies. We brought it up last time. Councillor Richards brought this up, and Julian, you said you've got 135 different policies or strategies today identified, which Laurie was pulling together. Now, I think this is a real key, important starting point for determining how the committees come together. In other words, can we group these policies by policy areas so that we don't end up with a committee system with a committee overburdened with policies, because we haven't looked at that first and determined where those policies should sit, if you understand what I mean. So the policies, the type of policy, the depth of policy, all these things, I think, go in the mix as part of the decision-making process. And then, associated with that, I think we have decisions to make about lacks, and not to build on what Councillor Maroof said in relation to policies. Some citywide policies don't work in certain areas of the city. How much freedom within an overarching policy will the LACs have enabled to deal with the issues in their locality? Because this is important. Issues in the city centre are not the same as issues on the outside. And we want to be able to have that flexibility for the LACs to work within their budgetary arrangements to deal with the issues that are pertinent to them. There will be some policies which obviously will apply universally. But we need to be looking at what the policies are that can flex in the localities. And I think the other issue which sits with me is it would be really good to have a decision-making map, so that it's abundantly clear when it comes to strategic decisions where that decision is discussed. So, for example, chair of committee with relevant officer, whether it gets passed down to the policy development committee or not, or whether it goes to the overarching committee for a decision because it's of that nature, or whether it goes to the urgency committee, which is assembled to deal with it because it's critical and has to be made now. That mapping process will help inform how this will operate and will bring, again, more clarity to what we're doing. So those are the 3 points I wanted to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. There's got to be some advantage to going last. I can just say just what they said. Apart from Penny. Sorry, Penny. You can say what they said. There was a couple of things that I particularly wanted to bring out of the sort of quizzing we're going to be able to do of other people, and in particular of other authorities when they come. And one of my main concerns is around the issue of urgency and urgent decisions that need to be made. Looking through the models in other places, there seem to be some places where they have an urgency subcommittee for the policy committees and other places where they have an urgency committee that sits separately. And I really think we need to find out how they work, because how we manage this is going to have a real key effect on how much we end up having to add to delegation. And it's also crucial that we keep as much decision-making that is councillor decision-making in that place. So the urgency issue and getting that right, I think, is really, really important. Like a lot of other people, I am concerned that we get the relationship with the LACs correct. I'm not sure if there's any of the, I know I have looked at them all, but I can't remember them all, any of the other authorities that are coming to talk to us that have got a similar system. But if they have, or any other local working, then I think we really need to try and tease out how the people have managed this. Another sort of fairly minor point is I'm keen to work out how we deal with the statutory scrutiny and the best way of managing that, whether we manage that within the policy system or completely separate to it. And again, that's something I think we need to ask other people for their experiences. One other point that I just wanted to ask about really, which is about Appendix 5 and all the lovely numbers about how much time it all takes everybody and how many people. When it's come to working out councillor hours and things, have you taken into account the fact that, does it take into account the hours that are needed for all the other committees that are not the policy committees? So have you basically taken the policy committees and divided by 84 or multiplied, or have you taken into account all those other committees? I hope you have. Good. That's the answer to my question. That's fine. And I think that's probably it, really. I think everything else has been raised that I've got in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Penny.
Well, don't worry, love. Well, what you've done, in actual fact, is raise most of the things I wanted to raise anyway, which is the advantage of going last. But I think the items of urgency are worrying us all. Not only individual urgent matters, but being able to get things through in a time frame that works in a modern world. I wasn't a councillor in the day of committee system, but I was actually a non-councillor member of both the Housing Committee and the Education Committee. And I saw how much of a talking shop they were. And we just don't want that. We need something that functions well in a modern day. And I think we're working towards it. And I think some of the work that's been done already is showing that. But it is a concern. And everybody's saying one of my major concerns is lax and how much responsibility we can devolve down to lax, which would possibly make the committee system above easier and better to work with. And the point that Mike made about being such a wonderful diversity that things that happen in lax in different areas could be quite different. And that sort of matters as well. I am worried about the time responsibilities. I mean, I have a huge ward and we do try and get around it a lot. We have lots of groups and organisations, so we already spend a lot of time, and as I know a lot of you do, out and about that aren't in the town hall. So we need an effective system that can use the time that we spend with the administration of the council is used well, and it's a sort of system that we don't have to keep coming back to things for. The other concern is if we need subcommittees, because if we end up with committees with subcommittees, as you all know, at one time there was something like 40 odd committees in the town hall. We don't want to go back to that. So yes, I think that's it really, because you've said all the other things. Mapping decision making is something we were talking about the other night. Strategic responsibilities really matter. Scrutiny, what scrutiny is needed and where it should sit, it's all been said. So I think that's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all. You will all notice that me, old and decrepit, writing notes. Alex, smart and young, typing on computer. It's just made me smile as we've been going along, so I thought I would share that with you all. Alex, is there anything you would like to come back on, or is there any more information that you want to tease out of members in relation to what they've said?
First of all, thank you everybody for rising to the challenge of having such a large amount of information to process and coming to this committee having clearly taken a view across it all. I hope this doesn't sound patronising, but there is a lot here, and I'm really pleased that we've come today, and I've just written, I may be typing, but it would be pages and pages and pages in a notebook if I'd been writing it out longhand, which is a really helpful set of steers, and I think what I should be able to do from this, what I will do is pull it out, reflect it back to you and say, here's what I've captured, and I'll, so all the comments about lax I'll put together and so on, so that you can have that as a sort of a reference point when we're going into session 2 and 3 of this inquiry. Perhaps you'd find it useful to have that set out for you again. I'm not going to attempt to respond on all the points. I don't think you're asking me to, and I'm not about to attempt to, but there were a few specific things where you asked me to clarify, or that I think I might just mention that I think I'm going to take as an action from you today to add into the kind of the job list, if I may, Chair, to quickly respond in that way. So, in reverse order, because I'm scrolling up, are any of the other authorities we might hear from authorities that have area committees? Yes. I've got to say the local authority invitees are the ones who are finding it hardest to pin down in terms of dates and times, just because of the way that members and officers' diaries work, I think. But we're hoping that there will be someone from Kingston on Thames, and they do have some form of local area committee. They are, I'm giving away secrets here, but they are structure D inside your pack here, where there is some form of local area committee. In terms of a decision-making map, yes, there's an action. We've got something underway, but we'll look at how we present. If we're giving you a map of committees, maybe we need to think carefully about how we present it also as a map of responsibilities. I think there's a good point in there. In terms of the key decisions versus strategic decisions, yeah, I think the discussion we had was, do we need to maintain a sense of these are category of decisions above a certain level which we treat in a certain way in the new world, which is in effect what key decisions are in the current world, but that definition is no longer required, but we were saying maybe we need something like it. So if that's what you're referring to, then yes, absolutely. A few of you mentioned cost implications, and I think I'm going to take that as an action to make sure that we are trying wherever possible to give you real costs attached to options. That won't be easy, and it's going to need to be imperfect, I think, but I clearly take that as an instruction. Avoiding star chambers, which to my knowledge was a mechanism, something to do with the English Civil War, and I think was it even I think 15th century, right? We're talking torture and calumny, so I hope we can avoid that entirely, but we'll see. I think those are the only key, sort of specific bits I needed to address, but thank you all for your time and energy in responding so thoughtfully.
Thank you, Alex, and we look forward to Sianed's work on the whatever Councillor Maroof gave you.
The Ladybird Book of Delegations.
That would work perfectly, thank you. Councillor Galbert.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. Councillor Alston asked whether all the other all the other committees that already exist, the time that we spent on there had been taken into account. Does that include things like the Police and Crime Panel and the Fire Authority and the Pensions Authority?
Yes, I think so. Everything that's specified. Yes, I think so. But I'll go and double check. I don't think it does include some of the kind of more informal groups that members might be going to, and it definitely doesn't include appointments to outside bodies. So it is by no means a complete measure of everything councillors do, but we have made an attempt to include all the formal committees, yes.
Can I just ask one question for clarification in relation to outside bodies? I know there has been a lot of discussion about we do seem to have an awful lot of those. Are we doing any work about looking at those to see which are the ones that perhaps, we really need to be at and perhaps we shouldn't be at?
Not strictly part of Alex's remit, but that is something that I've been wanting to review for a good while. It's just been getting the resource to do it. But I completely agree that it needs to be done as part of this piece of work, so that by the time we get to May, we've got some clarity around that.
Thank you, because I think that would be really helpful. Yeah. Councillor Legray.
Yeah, just to mention again the grouping of policies in policy areas, so we've got some understanding of how that comes together. We got that down.
Did we not agree that we'd already given the story because it's disappeared?
Well, that was the scheme of delegation. So yes, yeah, okay.
Couple of things. So I suppose with regard to the policy, that they will flow from the corporate plan. So that's something that's been, you know, we've been struggling with over the last couple of years. We're working to the 1-year plan at the moment, but the 3 to 5 year corporate plan is currently being in development. So that will help shape the policies for the organisation going forward, and that's something that as councillors you'll be leading on. The scheme of delegation, as this is a public record, I'd just like to say it is available to anyone on the internet, on the council's website, the full scheme of delegation, so anyone can have a look as to what's delegated to officers currently, and it will need to be reviewed going forward, because at the moment it's the leader's scheme of delegation. In a committee system it doesn't work like that. It'll all be within the constitution.
Thank you. We do have 4 recommendations, which are on page 62 in your pack. In relation to item 8, are we all happy to agree those, please?
I'm sorry, I'm distracted, councillors, by having that.
There's no pictures on it. The 4 recommendations on page 62, are we all happy to agree them, please? Yeah.
Can I just ask, Gillian, the scheme of delegations, it's published on the website, isn't it? So anybody who needs to read it desperately will find it on the council website.
Not only do we have a star chamber, we have an echo chamber. Gillian just told us that while you were getting your new exciting papers. So that's absolutely fine, which probably is best. It now brings us on to item 9, which is the date and time of the next meeting, which will be held on the 7th of December in the council chamber. And thank you everyone for your attendance this afternoon. I think it's been a really good meeting, and good afternoon.
Okay, councillors.
Very quickly, the papers are coming round when you've all